So now let's talk about break and join tool. And in AutoCAD 2021 version, the break at single point tool is updated. But before we talk about the update, let's look at the classical break tool. And in this case, I'm using AutoCAD 2020 version for this, but the same workflow will be applicable for even older versions of AutoCAD. So I'll just expand this modify panel and I'll click on this break at point tool. You also have the other tool, which is break at 2 points, but first let's have a look at this one. So break at point. Now you need to specify an object, and in this case I'll just break this line into 2 separate segments. For that, I'll click on this line and then AutoCAD will prompt me to specify the first break point. So let's click on this midpoint, and there we have it. This object is now separated into 2 segments. Now I'll press Ctrl Z a couple of times to get back to the original line, and I'll make another intersecting geometry here. So I'll just make sure that this line is intersected by another line, and I'll go to modify, I'll select this break option, and then I'll click on this line, and once again when the command line prompts us to specify breakpoint, I'll select this intersecting point, and again we have 2 separate segments. Now in this case I will also press Ctrl Z a couple of times, and in this case we happen to have the snap points. So in the previous case we had the midpoint, and then here we had the intersection point. But if you don't have any breakpoint, then the results will be very unpredictable. So in this case, I'll just go to this modify panel, and once again I'll select this, and now I'll just click anywhere randomly on this point, but just make a note of where I'm clicking. So I'll just click here, and now that's a random selection point. Now let's say that we want to break this segment up to this point right here. I'll click, and look at this. So instead of breaking this object in 2 different segments, it's completely deleted the first part of the segment. So that's an unpredictable result, and this is typical of break at single point in older versions of AutoCAD. So you need to have a break point, you need to have a reference in order to break an object. Now let's talk about break at 2 point. So I'll go to modify and I'll select this break at 2 point option, and in this case I'll just start once again with this line. So I have this line, I'll select this one here, and now in this case when I'm clicking this line here, that point also happens to become the first break point. So I'll click, and now that point became the first breaking point as well, because now command line will directly prompt me for a second breakpoint because it automatically selected that point as the first breakpoint. Now we just need to specify the second breakpoint. I'll just click here, and there we have it. So it created a gap between that first selection point, which happens to be the breakpoint as well, and the second breakpoint. Now I'll press Ctrl Z so that we have single straight line, and maybe a few more times Ctrl Z so that we have this complete line, and I'll go to modify and I'll select break at 2 point. Now in this case, if you want precise control over your first breakpoint as well, then you can follow this workflow. So just select your line, and now instead of selecting the second point, simply go to the command line and select this option, first point. Now you can precisely specify your breakpoint. So you can track any point and click at any point on this line to specify the first breakpoint, or you can also specify the distance using your command line. So I'm tracking that point, and now I'll just type 20 and I'll press enter. Now the first point is selected at a distance of 20 units from this point. Now I'll do the same for the second breakpoint. So I'll just go to this point, and instead of clicking, I'll just hover my cursor and move to the left. Now in this case, let me just go to this point again. If I'm moving it here, it's actually not selecting that point. It still has got this point selected. So in this case, let me go to this point again. And now it happens to be taking measurement from that point, because now I can see the distance here on my tooltip, which says 25. As I move closer to this, it's less and less and less. So now I know that it's tracking my point, which is on the right side. So now I can add a distance. So in this case, maybe let's type a distance of 36. So I'll type 36 and I'll press enter. There we have it. So now we ended up with this gap, which is a very precise gap. We know length of this line is 20 and this one is 36. If you want to verify this, just double click this line and you'll see the length 20. Press escape, double click this line, you'll see its length, that's 36. Now if you want to break your object in a similar way, let me first press Ctrl Z a couple of times. This kind of object in a similar way, then you can just follow the same workflow. Once again, I'll go to modify, break at 2 point. I'll select this circle, but remember the first selection point is also the first break point. So in this case, I'm selecting this point right here. Now that happens to be the first break point. Now in anti-clockwise direction, well, let me just track this point and I'll click here and we got this kind of gap now. So that's how you can break objects on 2 different points. Now this is how break tool used to work in older versions of AutoCAD. Let's now see how the break tool works in AutoCAD 2021. So once again, we have this drawing and I'll go to modify and I'll select break at 1 point. But in this case, I'm using AutoCAD 2021. Now again, I'll go to the same line and I'll just click randomly here. And once again, you'll see this command, break specify breakpoint. So in this case, instead of selecting the midpoint, I will just hover my cursor here. And for some reason, I'm not able to select any of the snap points, and that's because my object snap is off. So I'll just activate this. Now I'll go to this point, I'll track that point, and here I can now specify my point just by eyeballing or even by adding a distance. So in this case, I'll just click. And look at this. Now, instead of deleting this entire segment, which used to happen in the older versions, it will use that point as a break point and it will create 2 different segments. So here we have these 2 different segments. Now, it's much more predictable, as you can see. Now, again, I'm going to press Ctrl Z a couple of times and I'll show you one more difference, and that's this. I'll go to modify, I'll select break at a point, then I'll select this line, and once again, I'll just go to this point and again, object snap this point. I'll track this point and I'll add a distance. So again, I'm going to type 20, enter. Now the breakpoint is at a distance of 20 from this side. Okay, so that's completely predictable. But if I now press enter key, AutoCAD will repeat break at point. Now this is different because now if I press enter, it will just repeat the last command and I can again break my object on a single point. So as you can see, this entire segment is right now made with this single polyline from here to here. Let's break it here. So I'll just select this point here just to select this polyline, and then I'll click on this midpoint. And as you can see, it was break at single point. So it ended up breaking this polyline into 2 different segments. But in older versions of AutoCAD, if you use break at single point and then press the enter key, then instead of repeating break at single point, AutoCAD repeats break at 2 point option. So now that also has been streamlined and you get a predictable result here as well. Now that was all about the break tool. Let's talk about the join tool. The join tool is again in the expanded modify panel. So click this modify panel, expand it and select the join tool, which is right here. Select join tool, and now using join tool, we can join separate segments into one single segment. In this case, I've got 3 segments here. We have an arc and 2 polylines. Now, if you want to combine them all into a single segment, then select it, select all of these and press enter, and it will now join it into a completely single segment, which looks like this. Now it will not only join the segments which are connected from end to end, but it will also merge the gaps which are collinear. So these 2 lines are collinear and we have a gap here. So if you use join command here, so I'll go to this join command, I'll click here and then I'll click here and I'll press enter. It will merge this gap and it will create a single straight line out of this. Now this not only works for straight lines, but it also works for segments like an arc. We have a circle here. So let's first convert it into an arc, and for that we have no better tool than this break. So I'll select break at 2 point and I'll select maybe this point here, and I'll now select a point here. All right, so we've got this segment. Now we've got this gap. Let's add another arc right in between this. So I'll select center, start, end. I'll select center. For the starting point, maybe I'll just track this point. I'll click here. That's my starting point. For ending point, I'll just click here. Now we've got these 2 gaps here. Now in this case, if you want to merge any of these gaps, and you can only merge one of these gaps because even after merging one of the gap, you'll still end up with an arc. So if you want to merge any gap, select join. Now select the segment that you want to merge. Now this should be done carefully because in this case, if you want to merge this gap, then you should select this segment first and then this, because the merging of gap will happen in anti-clockwise direction. And if you want to merge this gap, then select this first and then this, because that's how anti-clockwise direction moves. So I want to merge this gap. For that, I'm going to select this segment first, then this one, and I'll press enter. There we have it. The gap is merged. If I try merging this, it won't happen, because if this gap is merged, the arc will convert into a circle, and that's not possible. The geometry will not convert into circle. So if you want to try that, let's do it. Join, select this, and you have the same segment basically. So press enter and nothing will happen. But in this case, you can try merging this kind of non-collinear objects as well, but that won't happen either. Join tool will not work here as well. So if I try joining it, where we have two separate segments, if I try joining it, well, it will fail. Zero objects joined. Well, that's because they are not collinear. So they should be collinear, or they should be on single line. But we still have a solution for this, and that's the blend curve. If you have non-collinear geometries and you just want to merge them, then you can use the blend curve tool, which is right underneath this fillet tool. So click this arrow and expand this, and here we have the blend curve. Now select the geometries that you want to merge, and there we have it. It just merged these two separate geometries into one. And that's how you can blend non-collinear shapes as well. And that was all about the break and join tool and the updated break at single point tool.